Welcome to Corporate Baggage, where we will help you unpack, repack, and lighten the load. We're your hosts, Whitney Siders and Catie Campbell.
For nearly 40 years, we've been coaches, consultants, and leaders inside organizations and supporting global enterprises and Fortune 500 companies to help make those organizations strong and healthy.
If there's a hot topic in the workplace, you better believe we'll be unpacking it here. Topics like return to office, performance reviews, compensation, nothing is off limits. Like, subscribe, follow us, and drop your baggage in the comments so we can unpack it together and lighten the load.
The only thing that should be in your bag is your paycheck. Welcome back to Corporate Baggage. I am so excited to dive into this next part of our series around recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and onboarding. And so today we're talking about interviewing. And we know there's a lot of people out there right now who are looking for a job, whether they're in a job that they hate and they're looking for their next right thing, or they've been laid off and it's time for them to really find their new path. And so here at Corporate Baggage, as usual, we help you unpack, repack, to lighten your load. And I think we should talk about interviewing from both the company perspective about really what hiring managers should do or what a company philosophy should be around interviewing. And then let's talk a little bit about and really talk to our listeners who are thinking about jumping back into the job market because it's time to find something new, or they're actively interviewing now and maybe they've done a bunch of interviews and they're not landing the right thing. And let's just figure out if we can maybe provide some best practices and a different way to think about attacking the whole process of interviewing, because it's daunting. It's daunting from the business side and it's daunting from the interviewee side too.
Yeah, all of it is. So if you've been following along, you listened to our last episode around what to spot in job descriptions as the individual and as the organization, making sure that that's really clear and crisp from an outcomes perspective. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to that, because that will inform kind of what we're talking about here today.
Right.
Too. So when it comes to the interview, I think it's a similar theme in terms of you have to start with understanding what exactly you're looking for, and not just words on paper, not just activities, but what are you really counting on that person to produce in the role, the outcomes that they're after. And that will help you narrow down more precise interview questions. And I'm not talking about okay, now we need to ask more about, tell me an example of, like, sure, you should be doing that. But how are we asking precise questions about that example? So how do we even know what to ask? And I think that gets back to what does it look like in this role and in this role here.
Okay, so let's assume that a recruiter or the company or hiring manager listened to our last episode and they were like, oh, wow, I need to update my job description. So they go, they follow all of that advice, and they update everything. So now they're going to market with a really well-written, well-produced job description. And now they're getting ready to start the interview process. So if you're the hiring manager, how should you be even thinking about starting the interview process with these really potential candidates and potential new hires?
So outside of the screening part, which is not my specialty.
No, past screening. The recruiter,
so past screening. I'm
HR's
talking
done
like
that.
They've given you you're setting up the interview.
Right.
So you're in the interview. Now, we could talk about some mistakes too. I see get made also.
We have to.
So who is that interview with? Sure, it might be with the hiring manager. Are they meeting with various people that they might be working with? I've seen people do panels, sometimes way too many people on a panel. Like, how are you really thinking about the interview? Now, that's going to be different for your organization and based on the role. But let's just jump to you're in a one-on-one interview. In order to leverage that precision that you developed in that job description, I'd recommend, I'm talking really, I know this is manual, but like going back through the job description and saying, how am I going to know if this person is able to produce this? How am I going to know that they have strong skills around this area to produce that? So that would require me looking at what is the outcome they're producing, what's in that job description, what skills are needed. Okay, what question would I ask to understand if they're getting there? So, said differently, what evidence am I looking for? What evidence do I want to hear them say? What evidence do I want to hear them describe? And then form your questions to that.
So, okay, but before we get into what we're going down a path already that really speaks to traditional interviewing. And that's most companies do some of that, right? They're asking the questions, they're doing all that stuff. But there's also this trend that has been growing for the last several years, but it's almost gotten out of control growing, where instead of you talking about how you could produce something, these companies really want people to show them that they can produce it. So what's your thought? What's your take on companies asking people to do kind of homework or create a deliverable prior to or moving through the rest of the interview process?
A couple things. And I think we agree on this one. We'll see.
We'll see.
So one, if that is the route that you want to go, which there are positive aspects of that. You get to see their actual work and what they're doing. It has to be during a finalist interview round where you think that you would hire them. You're at the point where you are strongly considering hiring them. And this is kind of the last thing that you need to be able to make the decision. It might expose any red flags, things like that. You're doing it at a finalist stage. Also, it's going to be something that is a light enough lift for them. I'm thinking you anticipate this taking no more than an hour max for them to create. And it's a light deliverable, but shows you enough, because otherwise you're asking them for free work, free labor.
Have you ever had to do this as part of the interview process?
For myself?
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've been a part of interviews where we've definitely done that before.
Okay, I had to do it.
And I'm trying to remember. I think yes. It's been a long time.
So I've had to do it twice. One time it was for a company I'll talk about because I ended up working there and I loved it. So I worked for Butterball, the turkey company, years ago in their corporate HR office and did a bunch of learning and development. Loved that job. And they asked me to facilitate something. They wanted something original. So they said, you can pick the topic. It needs to be around leadership development because that's what I was going to go in and talk about and do as the job. And it needed to be like a 15-minute long facilitation, so very short.
Yeah.
And it was something they said spend no more than, and I can't remember, this was like 2006, but spend no more than X number of hours on it. But it was something reasonable, like 2 hours.
Okay.
Because it was a 15-minute facilitation.
Right.
So I did. And that got me the job because they were like, okay, she can do the job. Because it was legitimately what I would be doing on the job. It wasn't hypothetical. It was, can she come up with something novel? Sometimes what we had to teach was scripted, but could you do something novel? Was it engaging? And
they wanted to see your style.
Right. And it was terrific. And I felt great because I could really show them what I could do versus try to tell them and convince them, like, yes, of course I can facilitate. Yes, I can work a hard room. No, I could show them that. I had a different experience. It was for a professional services company, and they had me do a project that I think for other people would have taken them probably a couple of hours. For me, it was way beyond my technical skill set. Part of the project was. Part of it was not. Part of it was like super easy. But the part that was beyond my technical proficiency at the time, which I was very clear in stating about in my resume, in interviews, it took me 12 hours to do something. They shouldn't have hired me because I think later on they were like, wow, we really wish she had that skill set. They could tell. They knew that from the interview, but they hired me for different reasons. But I remember being so exhausted trying to produce this thing. And what the company got right was they had completed a project for a client, and they basically took you back to a stage during the client work to say, okay, solve problem X. And what they wanted to see was, were you going to come up with new and novel answers than the ones that they came up with and deliver to the client? That was pretty cool. But they also wanted to see your technical proficiency. So both of those scenarios, I think, are fine. But when I admitted to them about how hard the one piece of it was, they were just like, yeah, that's fine. You can learn that. Guess what? I'd never learned how to do the thing. And it was like computation in Excel. It was stuff that some of my colleagues had gone to school for. I went to school for psychology. I did not go to school to be able to run massive models in Excel. It did not work well. But I've also heard of companies who are legitimately asking candidates to produce a piece of work that they intend to use.
Right. Different. But, and in that example, although it was painful and it took you 12 hours, to your point, it should have told them something.
Well, either
it should have weeded you out at that point.
It totally should have weeded me out, or they should have said, she's probably not going to get it.
Do we want to invest that time?
Or do we want to build something around her that says, okay, you don't have to do that data analysis? And that's really what it was
to support you differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, can we have somebody that works with Catie to do that piece, but she can do the other piece, which was like the critical thinking, coming up with novel solutions and that sort of thing.
Versus the opposite, which I think is what you're saying, is we have this project and we actually haven't done it yet. And we want you to do it. And we're getting free labor.
Right.
Versus going back and seeing, would you do this differently, or facilitating something so we could see your style. Yeah, I think the project that is being asked to be done, timing needs to be considered, effort needs to be considered, and what the project is in terms of fitting the job, and is it something that we're being genuine about asking for?
Yep.
What's the purpose of why we're asking for it?
Now, I don't know if it's still the case, but the company Automatic, they produce all of the really cool supplements, widgets, and that sort of thing to WordPress sites. Because WordPress is free, but then all the other things that kind of get bolted onto it, they produce that and they sell it. So part of their hiring process historically has been to have people in. It's almost like on a provisional basis, but they give you a project and they give you a couple weeks to work with the team and they give you something of substance to do, but they pay you to do it. Oh. And that's part of their interview process.
Yeah.
To me, that makes a lot of sense, right? That you're still paying somebody. It's a good kind of debut. It's like going on a first, second, third date. Do I want to keep going? Is this something of value?
For both sides.
Right, for both sides. Because if the candidate opts out, then at least they knew what was going to be like to work at the company with the team.
I love that.
And they treat them like a valued employee and they treat them with dignity and respect. But I keep seeing all over social media in particular when candidates are coming back and saying they're being given task after task to produce things that the company intends to use for itself. They're getting free labor for on the candidate side, the hopes of getting a job. And on the employer side, if the candidate's really great about what they're producing, maybe you're going to find a really good hire. But, to me, it just seems like we're kind of crossing a weird ethical boundary, getting somebody to produce something for free when you don't intend to hire them or you don't intend to compensate them for their work.
Well, and it's also just, it takes longer through the process. I think that's why having that whole process wired out is really important. I mean, that's standard hygiene, but you also want to make sure I do want this candidate to talk to multiple people, but is it too many people in terms of because of people's schedules, which is a reality, it's going to take months, right? Because you hear all the time these candidates going through months and months of interviews and projects, and then they don't get the job. And they're the last two. They're one of the last two, right? And of course that's going to happen, but can we consolidate that process so it's 3 weeks versus 3 months, and you have enough information to make that decision because you're starting with more clarity and alignment up front?
Or, well, the candidate should have the clarity and alignment up front. So if you're going to join a fire department, you know that you're going to go through weeks and weeks and months of training. You're not guessing. They tell you there's a 12-week schedule. Here's what we're going to have you do. Here's how we're going to evaluate you through the process. And this is what the decision-making process at the very end is, if you make it to the end, about whether or not we're going to hire you as a firefighter. You know that going in. So you can decide, do I want to budget the next 12 weeks to be able to be a firefighter, yes or no? But with most of these companies, they don't tell you what the process is. They're not really aiming to let you in under the hood. They're not going to tell you, this is a 6-week process. It's a 4-step process on our end. Candidates are going in blind. So companies are, taking them through these laborious processes. And I don't know how they have the time, money, and wherewithal to do it. But for candidates, it's horrific.
And I wonder from the candidate's perspective, and I'm sure there are candidates that are doing this, but why aren't we asking? And maybe we are. Right? Maybe candidates are saying, what is your hiring process? I think might be a little bit of fear around that because you don't feel like you have the upper hand in the situation. But let's say you do. You say, what is the interview process? What does it look like? Whether that's with a recruiter or the company you're interviewing with, and you get met with the answer of either something that is super diluted or even a straight I don't know. Is that a red flag?
I would think it's a red
To me,
flag.
it is.
To me,
Yeah.
100% would be a red flag if they're not being transparent. Part of the challenge
Not on purpose, but just not knowing.
No, it's not on purpose. But look, the reality is there's vulnerability on both sides of the interview process. On the company side, they're vulnerable because they have a need that's not being met, right? They have a business need, they've got a capability need, or they've got a gap, they need it filled. They probably want it filled fairly quickly. Some companies are not like that, but at least right now, the pace of business, like people want somebody in the seat.
Yeah.
So they're vulnerable at the moment without having that capability be filled. So they're looking to, who can we find that can come in and as quickly as humanly possible, hit the ground running and just go and be successful in the role. So there's vulnerability and there's a lot of risk because we don't know you and so we got to figure out a way to know you to know if it's a good decision. On the candidate side, unless you have a great job and you're just interviewing for fun, most times people they're worried, they're concerned, they are trying to make more money for their family, for themselves, right? There's a sense of urgency. If you're out of work, there's a sense of urgency there too. And so there's vulnerability and then saying, oh, gosh, if I ask questions like this, what does this, am I putting my best foot forward, right? Does that sound curious or does that sound needy? Does that sound like I'm putting upon the company by asking questions like, what is your hiring process or not? So everybody is sort of vulnerable in different ways through this process. And that leads, in my mind, it leads both sides to be a little bit, not disingenuous, but dishonest, they're not trying to lie to people, but everybody is trying to put their best foot forward for different reasons. And it kind of makes things a little bit messy. I think that's why candidates don't ask, what is really your process? And for some companies, they don't have a really well-defined process, so they can't even answer truthfully because they don't have a good answer.
I think if they did have the answer, they would lay it out. And I've seen that happen from, companies who do have a very structured process, for better or worse, right? They are laying that out. So that does happen. I think the ones that aren't laying it out just don't have it.
Is there one you can think of that
has a really clear process? I mean, I think back to some of the financial services companies we worked with. Crocs does a great job with their hiring process.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just a clear step-by-step, here's what you can expect through the process. I remember that being a really important part of their employee brand.
Well, we've done employee brand, employer brand, however you want to call it, work together. And I think that's a piece that everybody misses. I think as an interviewee, if you're an individual looking for a job, you know that the way that you answer the online job application to the way that your resume looks to what your online persona looks like, because now that's a thing, right? With social media and everything else, you know that the interview starts there. But you and I both know, working on the company side of things, that the interview for the company starts well before somebody just stumbles upon your open job description. It starts way sooner than that.
Yeah, they're looking, they're watching. I know that, and this could be different now. It's been a while since I've seen this, but I know New Balance has a pretty structured process around that too. I mean, a lot of times your bigger corporations, your big companies will have a structured process, not because it's necessarily candidate driven, but because they need to have it to work effectively internally.
Right.
So the flip side of that is so in our theme of taking it from good to better, let's think. So if you do have a structured process, going through that from the candidate lens. So just like you would think about the customer experience, thinking about the candidate experience and what do you want them thinking, feeling, and saying throughout that entire journey, throughout that entire process. And then if you don't have that structure already, instead of starting with what are the steps, start with the journey, start with the candidate experience, and then wire out that journey.
Because the reality is, if you go and interview for a company and you either don't get the job or you decide this isn't the right one for me and you turn down the offer or what have you, what you want to be able to do is say, yeah, I was going to go work for company X, but then decided it wasn't the right thing. But the whole process was like awesome.
Right.
You
Totally.
want, so your employer brand is very much should be a part of the interview process, as you said. But then that's whether you hire the person or not. So people should walk away from the experience saying that was a great experience. It just wasn't the right job. Or they chose somebody else, but man, I had such great conversations and the interview made me so comfortable, or I really felt like they understood me and they seemed to care a lot about like getting to know me. That is part of your brand that's on the street. So I think people are typically thinking about, I need to hire a manager for this role. Okay. But as a company, you should be thinking about, what do we want everybody else to know about what our interview process is and our hiring process? And is this a great place to work? Because especially if you work in a very tight-knit industry, everybody's going to know. So if it's terrible, everyone's going to know. If it's amazing, everyone's going to know. What do you want the word on the street to be about what it's like to interview for your company?
Because the next time someone interviews and they say, oh, wait, Whitney, you interviewed with them before. You didn't work there, but you interviewed. How was it? And I'm going to tell them.
Right.
I can specifically remember certain people that I've interviewed with. It's funny that I remember the good ones. You would think I would remember the bad ones, but maybe I've just moved on past that. But I do remember the good ones, and I would work with those people again in terms of referring people there or partnering with them on other things. But I think about, especially in my earlier years, a lot of that I took good learnings from in terms of questions to ask, the way people treated you, the different interactions that I had, and the experience.
My favorite one was a nonprofit that I worked for in California. And I'd gone through interviews with a couple different people. And then the last piece was with the executive director and the CEO. Mm-hmm. And then after I finished that, and I was still on the fence because the salary it was a nonprofit, and I was going from for-profit to nonprofit. That's a little bit of a jump. And so I was a little hesitant on that, but I was kind of sold on the organization. And really what the piece of the interview process that I remember the most was walking around the building, and the executive director took me into almost everybody's office, in particular the people that I was going to work with most closely. Mm-hmm. Some of them I had interviewed with and some other people I had just met, and said, this is Catie. We're really hoping she joins. We've just finished our interviews with her, and we just want to show her where IT is. We just want to show her where we do this thing.
Right.
And like, this is where your office would be. This is what your view would look like. I mean, they sold the job because they had made their decision already. And I remember that being so powerful because I could start to visualize what it was like to work there. That part of the experience, this is like 12 years ago, mm-hmm. more than that, 15 mm-hmm. years ago. It's been a long time since I worked there, but I remember that so vividly and how much that meant to me, that really spoke to who they were as an organization, that they really wanted to create a family feel. That's how they did it. We're going to introduce you to all the members of the extended family. I had met the core family, right?
Right.
But that's what it was. So even if I hadn't decided to work there, I would have always left with that memory of with that feeling, and just know that care really represented who they were from a values perspective. And that was a big part of their interview process, is really they were wanting to put themselves on display in a very good and healthy way.
I believe that a strong interview process will make you feel something, whether it's positive or negative. The interview process, you will be able to spot genuine care like that if the interviewer is actually, if they are showing up understanding that they're being interviewed too. I think you could tell that immediately from the questions that are being asked, from the body language, from the feeling that you get from it. So I think that this goes back to a lot of things. Go back to this is the awareness that you have, the feelings that you're getting, like really tuning into that versus, like you said, we still needed to work through some salary stuff. Like I was a little worried about like on paper stuff, but you knew from those interactions and that feeling that was the place that you want it to be.
100%.
So all of those other things can be worked through and negotiated. That's a business transaction.
Right.
The other stuff is what you need to sell each other on.
So the thing that companies are missing is really thinking through the candidate experience and seeing the interview process as a part of their employer brand.
Yes, because it's not about if that person comes on or not, like you said. It is that interaction will live on. And that could impact. It's almost like when you think about networking or burning a bridge, it's the classic, like, you never know who that person that you interviewed with might be best friends with your next CEO.
Right.
That you don't know today. Who knows, needle in a haystack, but like the impact and the connections, classic 6 degrees of separation. And people talk about it. I mean, I'm not saying that everything is going on social media, but it can. And especially today, I mean, I can't we could go down this hole, but like from a company perspective, you have to know that that is at risk. And I've seen this, and I struggle not to like call it out too much, is candidates getting on social media and describing their experience in a way that does not make them look good.
So this is a catch-22 though. Can we just be honest? It's a catch-22 that you can have a terrible interview experience because the company is not thoughtful about their interview.
Sure.
And go talk about it on social media.
Sure.
And that's a part, we just said, it's the extension of your employer brand.
Yes. And I think that's
right.
fair.
So on one hand, I'm cool with companies getting called out when they're
100%.
when they're garbage. However, you're right that then that reflects on you negatively because it's like, oh, Whitney didn't get hired, so she's going to go in and she's going to complain. Maybe. Or does it just look like you're just anytime there's a wrinkle in the business plan? She's not resilient. She's whiny. She's just going to go and air our dirty laundry on social media. She's not a team player. I mean, it's all the things that's the antithesis of probably what you're trying to show yourself as a candidate. I mean, it's a catch-22 because it's probably legitimate that a lot of these companies have garbage hiring processes, and it's also legitimate that your employee brand, your individual personal brand, is going to look like garbage if you just go and complain about it on the internet. So how do we fix this, Whitney?
Depending on how you go about it. I mean, there's always that risk. And I think if you go, you explain your personal experience and how it went from a factual perspective, that I think that there's parts of that work, that we should hold organizations responsible for that. And it's a part of the brand. Yes. And I'll give you an example of the opposite side.
Okay.
So I think I sent this TikTok to you. There was this one woman who was having trouble snagging a job and was going through all of these interview process, kind of like how we're describing, dragging her on, didn't get it, dragging her, didn't get it. I've seen a lot of those. Some people are turning that into a moment to create their brand, to get them more interviews, and that's great. This one person that I saw, it was a little cringy for me to keep watching because I saw her sabotaging her personal brand, which she would show up crying. And I'm not saying don't have emotion, but like showing up crying about, I don't know why they wouldn't hire me. I have all of these credentials and these skills and they're just not, and like basically just whining about it. And that she was seeking validation from the community.
Yep.
I understand. And you could clearly tell that she did not understand that video would live forever.
Yeah. There are so many people that don't still understand that the internet lives forever.
That's many things.
Hello.
But when it comes to your corporate, like when it comes to, if you want to work in corporate, which some people don't, right? But if you would, it's almost like, okay, Whitney, like maybe you shouldn't do that if you ever want to be a politician. But like, I don't. But like maybe I do. But I don't.
It doesn't matter. So let's just pretend for just a second that these companies have a really solid interview process, right? And they've taken our advice. They've thought through, hey, this is the candidate experience we want to have. This is the employer brand we want to put out there as we're hiring people. Let's pretend all of that is good. You're still going to have people that are going to want to run to the internet and whine and complain about not getting picked. This isn't a prom date, right? What they're trying to do, although kind of similarly.
It's like a pick-me attitude.
It's a pick-me attitude, but it's really, companies are trying to find the best fit for the culture, and they know their culture. They know the team. They know their customers. They know their environment. And so everything that you do leading up to them making a decision is they should be evaluating whether or not you're going to fit in with what we know is our business or our organization or our team. And so, yeah, I would cringe at the same, and yes, you did send me that TikTok. I would totally cringe at somebody who wants to run to the internet and get, bent out of shape because they didn't get picked. When I look at the companies and think they need to be, they're making a financial decision by hiring you. They need to be finding the best fit for their company. And in some ways we have to honor that if you're not the right fit, then maybe, you'd be there and you'd be miserable because they know what it's like to be there and you don't. You're making an assumption based on a job description and a few conversations you've had or what their word on the street is.
Right. And that experience, although that person didn't talk about the business name, I'm sure she did with her network, not on the internet,
sure.
Right? And so back to the employee brand, I think that's a clear distinction that is often not brought up, which is the interview process, the candidates. It doesn't just affect that candidate, it affects your brand moving forward.
Your personal brand.
Yeah. Well, your personal brand, and then from the candidate perspective, sharing it about the company.
It does. So
wherever they're sharing it.
So, honestly, I think the companies need to have their stuff tight. They need to have their process and their definition of what we want the candidate experience to be tight before they even go to market. But then if that's the case, then candidates need to be, if you're going in for an interview, that yes, they're evaluating you, but you should be evaluating them too. So maybe that employer has their process all lined out and it's great. Then you should be going, do I want to work here? Are these the kind of people I want to work with? Is this the right environment? Is this the right team? So that...
Yeah, it's the candidate process when it works. And when you don't get chosen, what is that experience? So when we say candidate experience, it's all of it. So you have your final 2 candidates. What is your plan to make that person who you don't end up going with feel honored, feel like the time was worth it, and feel like they have a positive experience about the company?
Right.
So that is often looked over because the focus is hiring someone. That's the goal. And what we're saying is hiring is the priority and the impact is your brand.
It is. And I think you and I have seen and heard, and maybe even experienced too, but we've seen and heard recently too, that because of the volume of resumes and applications that a lot of companies get, and they'll put people through the interview process, that they're not hearing back from the company about a decision for weeks, if not months.
Right.
It used to be that it was only candidates who would ghost companies, that companies would say, hey, we want to hire you, or hey, we want to interview you, and they would just disappear. Now, a lot of candidates are reporting that companies are doing the same thing too, that they aren't hearing back from recruiters, they're not hearing back from hiring managers or HR, whoever is managing the process. And so they've got their heart set on working for this company. They've been bought in. They're doing research. They're feeling like, yes, okay, all of this is going great. And then nothing. It's crickets. So the interview experience has just been super challenging, in particular of late, because the volume, I think, is overwhelming most businesses. And I know in hiring for a couple of companies and organizations here locally, we encountered the same thing too. There's a lot of people looking. And so, yeah, part of the experience was making sure we were getting back to people in a reasonable amount of time, setting up interviews as quickly as possible, saying no to candidates very quickly too if we knew they weren't going to be a good fit, like not waiting until the very end when you finally hire the person. If you know after the first interview or two it's not going to pan out, let them know and say, thank you so much, really appreciated it, and best of luck. Yeah. I mean, even just having that be out there at a minimum, like to me, that should be table stakes.
Yeah. Well, and in the vein of there's so much going on, the hiring managers are busy and all of the things like that. I think it's also really important from the experience perspective to make sure that when you are hiring, you are present. I've heard a story recently, high-level senior leader hiring or interviewing for jobs, very different experiences at different companies that she described to me. And one was getting on a call where 2 of the people interviewing her, one showed up late and one jumped off early.
Oh, nice.
And then they rescheduled some more time and the same thing happened. So what you get in the interview process is indicative of the environment. I had a good friend of mine, shout out Renee, who said this to me in another context, not in this context at all, very much more personal context, but I think it's applicable here, is that when people show you their true colors, believe them. So when people are showing you this is how it is here, don't dismiss it. Oh, they're busy. Oh, this is the interview process. Your interview process is like you said, dating. It's your first date. You're sending your representative. You're sending your best foot forward. So if this is your best, what's the organization not at its best? That would concern me.
And this is not just so I want to make sure that we're being super clear here, because you and I have spent a lot of our career working with people who are in HR, people services, whatever you want to call it. So this is not a knock on the HR.
No.
This is a whole company thing.
Yes.
But companies need to be prepared to
setting their HR professionals up for success. Yes.
Right. The hiring manager. This is not, most people who are hiring managers, this isn't their full-time job.
No,
they have a full-time job, and now another duty as assigned is to hire somebody else on your team. It's a huge undertaking. So, making sure that we're setting people up on the company side to do all the things that we're talking about, to do the follow-up, to, not make the process laborious, to make sure that you're treating candidates with respect. We wouldn't have the people crying on the internet, or everyone would look at that and go, "Ooh, that's cringy," if the companies were setting themselves up too. So setting up the hiring manager to make sure that they have the time, they have the resources that they need, they have really good instructions about how to hire and onboard somebody, or how to interview and hire somebody, so that the candidate experience is what the company really sets it out to be.
It's almost like customer service these days. I don't know how you feel about this, but it's like the bar is so low that when I have a positive customer service experience, like with a technician, or I bought a couch or a mattress, like I'm talking basic stuff like that. If that experience, if they do what they say they're going to do, they show up on time and they get the job done, I'm like, oh my God, I love you, and I write a 5-star review. Because the bar is so low.
That's right.
For everyone else. And I think it's similar in the candidate experience, which is, well, we just expect it to be really horrible. So when it's like, okay, we're like, oh, well, that's not that bad. When really it should be, this is the place where you spend a majority of your time. So example of that senior leader I was talking about, the other positive experience she had, of which she was hired in, they made time. They're a client of mine, full disclosure. They are very busy. They are a lot going on, unlike a lot of organizations. And you know how long it took them to hire? A couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean,
and they made back-to-back interviews, back-to-back scheduling, because they made time for what mattered most. And I strongly believe that amongst my personal and professional life is we're all busy. We all have a lot of stuff going on, but you make time for what you want to make time for.
That's right.
So what do you care about?
One of my best clients does that too. We live in the virtual world where most of the interview stuff happens through email, through text, phone call, and Zoom or Teams or some sort of video capacity. Once they know that they've got a candidate or two that's in the final hiring kind of stage or interview stage, they fly. Mm-hmm. They fly to where they are. So they'll go to Pittsburgh, they'll go to Ohio, and they don't even require that person to come to them. They'll go to your hometown.
They're not messing around.
Because they want to show that they are a serious company. So as part of the candidate experience, oh my gosh, you're feeling the love. If the president of the company or a vice president for the company is getting on a plane to physically come see you because they care a lot about getting to know you. That's and huge. To really sell the company to you. Yeah, it's huge. And so the experience from the get-go is I matter, they care. They're, this is a values-based company, but they actually are living the values because I can see it in action before I'm even on the payroll. How cool is that? And that does take time. It does take effort. It does take resources. But in return, if you are hiring this person, they get on board. Now you've got somebody who is ready to hit the ground running. They're juiced up and energized from day one, and they feel like they're a part of the team as opposed to waiting for like 3 months or 6 months to roll around before they kind of feel integrated. They already are feeling the love. And so if companies can figure out a way to make candidates feel the love, I think you're going to see more candidates on the flip side really lean into the interview process in a way that means that the end result is we've got a really good employee-employer relationship.
Yeah. So you're saving money And that's at the end. At the end of the day, like we talked about the job descriptions, what you get in, you'll get out. And so hoping that you're taking away from this that, yes, you need to get clear on the job descriptions, what you're after to attract the right people. But then once they're in, it's about making them feel something during that experience and seeing what you feel through it too. Certainly those questions will help, but thinking about the whole experience as very comprehensive is what we're after.
And on the interviewee side, you should be thinking about the experience as being comprehensive too.
Both sides.
How does it look from start to middle to end? And that should tell you everything you need to know about whether or not this is a professional relationship that you want to enter into as well.
Yep. Check us out for more. We'll be putting some of these resources on our site so you can follow along and check them out. And
at corporatebaggage.com.
Yes. Good luck in your process.
All right. I think we packed it up
for today.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thanks for listening today. If you have some corporate baggage you want to unpack or something you're taking away from the conversation, drop it in the comments.
Please find our social links in the description, and we'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone that you think it could help too.